Coming up on this episode, just want to hit on a lot of major Warriors issues right now that I've been seeing from you guys in the YouTube comments and also all across social media, talking Jonathan Kuminga, Draymond Green, Brandin Podziemski, Jimmy Butler, trade rumors, and the kind of rotation we could see as the Warriors prepare to face the Memphis Grizzlies on Thursday night. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good start to your week. Just wanted to jump on and hit a few Warriors issues here that have been ongoing over the past week to 10 days. The Warriors haven't really played too much. Of course, you've had all the NBA Cup stuff, which resulted as the Bucks beating the Thunder. Look, I couldn't really care less. I think I watched the first half and then that was it for me. I legit just could not care less about the NBA Cup, and it's a bit of an issue for the NBA, but that's a completely different discussion away from the Warriors that we don't need to get into. But I feel like the lack of games, the fact that the Warriors played on Sunday against the Mavericks, played before that against the Rockets, they've had multiple days off kind of in a row here. And just the lack of games has led just to a lot of discussion about the current state of the Warriors and their issues that they're facing moving forward, and plenty of chatter across social media and other areas. So just wanted to dive into that. The first topic I kind of wanted to get into that I've seen so much across social media is the whole Jonathan Kuminga-Draymond Green aspect, and plenty of people in my YouTube live stream on Sunday after the loss to the Mavericks talking about the Warriors' defense early in that game, the fact the Mavericks came out and made their first 9 or 10 shots, and saying, well, what do you expect when you bench Draymond? You've got Kuminga starting out there. There's clearly just not going to be the same defensive ability than what there has been, obviously, for so many years with Draymond in the starting lineup. So I get that. And then the people on social media saying, when after the Warriors obviously made the Dennis Schroeder trade, and seeing the projected starting lineup for the Warriors with Steph and Schroeder and Wiggins and Kuminga and Looney, and you just click on that and you see all the replies, and it's just people, all they're doing is saying, what are we doing starting Kuminga over Draymond? How can we justify that? So I don't think it's that big of an issue, personally. I don't think it's an absolute make or break situation whether Draymond or Kuminga starts. I just think it's more important for Kuminga and the overall outlook on him than it is for Draymond. Draymond's 34 years old. We know who he is. I think he's going to have the same impact regardless of whether or not he's starting or coming off the bench. But for Kuminga here, you look at him and the Warriors are essentially in a trial period of saying, do we want to pay this guy $150+ million as a restricted free agent in the offseason? Do we think he's that player to be able to be worth that? Because I can tell you right now, if you're paying a 22-year-old over $150 million, or it doesn't even have to be 150, just over $100 million as a restricted free agent in the offseason, then that guy better be a starter for you. And that's the thing that I always had the issue with entering the season, is that, hey, the Warriors need to figure this out, because if they're going to pay this guy, you better do so on the premise that he is going to be a starter for you, because what is the point in paying over $100 million for a 6th or 7th man? You just cannot do that in the current landscape of the NBA with the first and second tax apron and stuff like that. The Warriors did it. They did it with Jordan Poole. They paid him $130 million to essentially be a 6th man, at least for the start of it. And they said, before the extension even kicked in, they said, no, we don't want to borrow that. No, thank you. And sent him off to the Washington Wizards in what essentially primarily was a salary dump. Now, yes, they got Chris Paul back, but they ended up waiving Chris Paul after one season. That was a salary move for financial flexibility moving forward. So if the Warriors are going to get themselves essentially stuck in a situation again financially where they pay Jonathan Kuminga over $100, $120, $150 million, whatever it may be, you better know that you have a starting caliber player on your hands. So that is what the Warriors are doing right now. They are trialing this to say, okay, before we give you the money, are you this caliber of player? Are you a starting player who can play 28, 30+ minutes a night, who's going to average 18, 20+ points a game for us? Are you that player? Now, you can question very much so that well, the Warriors shouldn't be in this trial period when they've still got a 36, nearly 37-year-old Stephen Curry, who you are trying to maximize and who you are trying to contend with again, or at least try and discover a deep playoff run. Now, I can get that. I just don't think, I don't think you can be too critical when so many of us wanted Kuminga to be starting and playing this kind of, getting this kind of opportunity, these 30 plus minutes a game. So many people wanted that at the start of the season. You can't necessarily turn around and be overly critical of this decision. And to be honest, I still like it because I think it is important that we see this trial period, and I don't think it necessarily makes too much of a difference to the current state of the Warriors. I think Draymond will still play the same amount of minutes. I don't think his impact will necessarily change that much. He's going to come in 5 minutes into the game. I just don't think it makes that much of a difference to Draymond or the Warriors, but it will make a significant difference to their future and what they decide they've got with Jonathan Kuminga, and whether they want to pay the guy or whether they want to trade him by the deadline and try and get another piece and use him as a trade asset before the February 6th deadline. So I'm probably different to a lot of fans, I think, who are heavily critical of JK starting over Draymond and that decision. And we'll wait and see how long it lasts. Do I think it's going to last? Maybe not. I think there's only two outcomes here. I think the first outcome is that the Warriors make a trade to get themselves in a situation where they can afford to start both Draymond and Kuminga. Or the second one is they make a trade and it involves Kuminga, right? Whether it's a big one for Jimmy Butler or whoever it may be, really. So what I'm more focused on, because I still want Kuminga to be a long-term Warrior player and become the player that he and the franchise ultimately envisages. And, okay, it hasn't led to winning, and that's ultimately the big issue here. But Kuminga, in a starting role over these last 5 games, he's shown himself he's a 20-plus point per game scorer in this league. He just is. He's a natural scorer. Okay? Now, the Warriors have to figure out whether or not that leads to winning or not. It led to winning in that big game against the Timberwolves where he took over, the Rockets, I should say, where he took over down the stretch and he had that 33-point performance. That was huge. Since then, hasn't been great in terms of contributing to winning, but in saying that, the Warriors should have beaten the Rockets in the NBA Cup quarterfinal. They just should have won that game. And that was a bit of an issue with Kuminga and the rest of the offense and Steph not being able to get it done down the stretch. A few controversial refereeing decisions. The Warriors are in a lot of these games. They should be winning a lot of these games. So I haven't seen enough of a sample size yet to suggest that, hey, Jonathan Kuminga in the starting lineup is considerably contributing to losing, right? I haven't seen enough either way, which is why I think the Warriors should stick with it a while longer, because I just don't think a 3-4 game sample size is enough to determine this. It has to be 10, 15 games. And will that cost the Warriors their season? I just don't think it will. I don't think it's making that much of a difference to this current state of the Warriors, this current state of Draymond Green. Okay? I do think it will make a big impact to the future of the team, and that's why I think the trade-off there is worth it and worth the risk of seeing where this goes. Right? I'm more focused on the center position because, to me, again, the Kuminga-Draymond thing, I think it's a bit overplayed. I don't think it's that much of an issue. The center position, I just don't think Kevon Looney or Trace Jackson-Davis are starting caliber centers on deep playoff teams in the Western Conference. I just don't think they are. We've seen TJD, he's been quite disappointing this season, it must be said. I do think, I actually want to see him in the rotation, back in the rotation a bit more in the second unit, because if Schroeder is running that second unit, he's all of a sudden going to come in and he's going to be running a heap of pick and rolls. He's going to be the best lob pass the Warriors have. I could actually see TJD being a much bigger presence and a much more utilized asset in second units with Schroeder than what he has been previously in the first 25 games of this season. So I actually have some optimism for what TJD could do here going forward, but just in a second unit bench role, depending on the opponent, depending on how he's playing, 12, 15 minutes a night, see how he goes. Okay. Loon has had a great bounce back season, been one of the big pluses for the Warriors. Like the end of last season, I think a lot of us, maybe including myself, thought this guy was done. Thought, okay, he has to be a trade asset. He's on an expiring contract. Move him out for a more bona fide rotation player who you can bank on, because I'm just not sure we can do that with this guy anymore. Now we can. He's back. He's had a great offseason, really got in shape, and he's having an excellent season. Excellent season. Do I think, though, that he is a starting caliber player on a championship team? You can argue he was just over 2 years ago in 2022, but that Warrior roster was so much different to what this one is. In terms of the offense, like Kevon Looney is a limited NBA player, right? I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm surprised and amazed, and huge credit has to go to him for how valuable an NBA player he is when he's 6'9", doesn't really get off the ground, doesn't have a jump shot. Okay? Like, he's a limited NBA player, but still a very valuable one. Again, credit to him. But this roster is completely different. Okay, you look at the 2021-22 championship team, you had the shot creation and the shot making of Jordan Poole. You had the three-point shot making of Klay Thompson as one of the best snipers in the history of the NBA. You had Otto Porter Jr. playing that kind of 4-5 position. You know, he could be out there next to Loon at the 4, spacing the floor for you, shooting nearly 40% from 3 on decent volume when he was out there and healthy. Right. The Warriors roster now, they don't have that Steph Curry backcourt teammate. They do to a degree now with Schroeder, and he's going to be very helpful. I'm not sure he's going to help Loon necessarily that much, because he's not necessarily, like, he's not a three-point sniper. He's shooting 38.7% from 3 on over 6 attempts per game so far this season in his tenure with the Nets, but he's not like the Jordan Poole, Klay Thompson. And I think just that spacing, that shot creation from the perimeter, and the stretch forward ability of an Otto Porter Jr., that allowed you to play Looney, I think, a lot more, and for him to be a lot more valuable. As opposed, again, to this roster, you don't have Jordan Poole, you don't have Klay Thompson, and you've got Jonathan Kuminga, who he wants to attack the paint, and Kevon Looney's just not spacing the floor for you. So that really puts you in a bit of a predicament when you've got situations where Kuminga's trying to attack the paint, and yet Looney's guy can just sag off him and be that extra helper at the rim, which makes things more difficult on Kuminga. So this Warrior roster, I think, is just really vastly different to the championship one that was in 2021-22, and that makes Kevon Looney's limitations stand out a little bit more, rather than making up for those limitations in a way that I think Klay Thompson did, Jordan Poole did, just by having that offense, that perimeter shooting out there that could offset Looney's lack of perimeter shooting and utilize his strengths, which are, passing, screen setting as well, like getting those guys open off pin downs and stuff like that. So I just don't think Kevon Looney, Trayce Jackson-Davis are starting caliber centers on a good team, like a good deep playoff team in the Western Conference. I just don't think they are. And so that's why I still think the Warriors' biggest need here, if it's not going to be going out and trading for a star like Jimmy or LeBron or something like that, it has to be getting a better quality starting center, which is why so many people right now are pushing for Nikola Vucevic or another stretch big. If they become, if Miles Turner became available, I don't think he will, but he's one. There's a little bit of chatter around Valanciunas. Valanciunas isn't a stretch big, so I'm just not sure you'd be getting enough of an upgrade there, given the assets you'd have to give up. But it's really interesting. I think it's an opportunity cost factor for the Warriors. I think they're just so scared to go and make a middle tier move, because it might impact their ability to go make a more impactful, bigger move down the track. And I absolutely understand that. I absolutely get that. I feel that as well. And it's exactly why they went and got Schroeder, because Schroeder's just a no-risk move. It doesn't impact your ability to go and make a bigger deal down the stretch, whether it's in the coming weeks before the deadline or in the offseason or whatever else. But if you ultimately decide that, and I'll get into the Jimmy Butler stuff in a second, if you ultimately decide we just can't get Jimmy Butler, then they need to go and make a move pretty quickly. And I just don't see why they can't go and get Vucevic. I laid it out, trading for Vucevic is now difficult because you obviously don't have the Melton contract and you're not going to give up Schroeder for Vucevic. Like, the only way Schroeder gets traded again before the deadline is if he is part of a Jimmy Butler trade or a LeBron James trade or another player making $40+ million. Otherwise, Schroeder's not going to get traded. He's just not. And so getting to Vucevic's $20 million salary all of a sudden becomes more difficult when you don't have that big Melton piece of $12.8 million. You still can do it, though. Okay? I've seen too many people on social media, and again, this comes down to the Butler thing. Too many people on social media, because these have to be 3-for-1, 3-for-2 trades where the Warriors are sending out more players and they're bringing back in. Too many people on social media proposing trades that are just not possible. Where the trade itself is possible, and in the Fanspo trade machine, it says, yep, tick this one off. That's fine. But the Warriors then have to go and sign a player or two, depending on what they're left over with. They have to go and sign a player or two. And they are hard capped at the first apron. They're like, now after the Schroeder trade, they're like 300,000 under it. They need the money to be able to go sign a guy or two. Okay, and that's the thing you have to factor in. When you guys jump on the trade machine, you've got to make sure that essentially if you're sending out more players than you're bringing back in, then you have to leave money left over in the salary cap. Like, the Warriors have to be trying to bring back like over $1 million less to be able to then go sign someone, which is the biggest issue when I see trade proposals on X and X/Twitter, whatever, is that people too often, they just say that this trade is eligible on the Fanspo trade machine, but it's not in reality, because the Warriors don't then have the ability to go sign someone. So on the live stream, if you watched the other day, I came up with a trade that, I think is pretty reasonable, where the Warriors get Vucevic and Torrey Craig from the Bulls. The Bulls get GP2, Kyle Anderson, and 3 second-round picks, and the Pistons, who I think they're going to be a huge player before the deadline, because they're the only team with all this cap room. They can take on Moses Moody, not send a player out, and just give up 2 seconds, take a flyer on Moses Moody. Now, would they want to do that and interrupt their cap flexibility moving forward? Maybe that's the issue, but I could see them doing it. I could see them saying, okay, we just get this guy who's just really been limited with opportunity. We just get him for 2 second-round picks. This guy was a former lottery pick, has shown himself when he plays to be a capable rotation NBA player. Like, I feel like the Pistons could talk themselves into that. And if you're the Bulls and you ultimately decide we're not going to get a first-round pick for Nikola Vucevic, then what's the issue with 3 second-round picks and Kyle Anderson, who you might be able to flip as an asset to something else later down the track, and then GP2 is an expiring contract? Like, I don't know. Let me know. I feel like that is a pretty reasonable deal for all three teams. Okay? The Warriors get their stretch five. All of a sudden, you can go to Steph, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, Vucevic, and just try that again. Because I think that's the only real solution here, is the Warriors get a stretch big that allows Kuminga and Draymond to start, and they either do that, or it's trading Kuminga, or it's a situation where somehow, someway, the most unlikely option here, I think, is Kuminga and Looney all of a sudden starts working brilliantly, and that's actually like your 4-5 combination going into the playoffs, which I just don't think is going to happen. I don't think that is going to happen. More so maybe for the Looney part of it than the Kuminga part of it, but I think just that combination in general. I don't think you're going into a playoff, a postseason run. I don't think you're going into that with that as your 4-5 combination, thinking, oh yeah, we can make a run all the way to the finals. I just do not see that. So it's you've got two options here. You upgrade at center, or you trade Kuminga. Okay, Warriors are going to be... I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked if one of those two things don't happen before the deadline. Shocked. Like, that just has to happen. It just has to happen. Unless, again, there's another world, a different universe, where Kuminga and Looney all of a sudden become this amazing 4-5 combination. It just won't happen. All right, I want to move on from that. Brandin Podziemski. I want to just talk about him for a second, because there's so much chatter about him at the moment. There's so much criticism about him at the moment. I think a lot of it is unfair. A lot of it is justified based purely on his form this season. It's been disappointing. But we know most of the criticism has come because of the expectations that he set upon himself and what the franchise set upon him as well. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be very different to a lot of fans, a lot of you guys watching or listening. I'm sorry, I'm just got to put it out there. I have sympathy for him. I have sympathy for the guy. He's a 21-year-old kid. He's at the start of his second season. It's not like this was a top 5 pick or anything like that. He's a 19th overall pick. Yes, had a great rookie year. All-rookie first team honors was fantastic. Like, I just have sympathy for the pressure that he's under right now and for the situation that he's found himself in, where I think external factors have not helped him whatsoever and have actually harmed him. And so I think we need to do a better job of understanding that, of realizing that as fans. Like, to me, his comments in the offseason, which people will go back to every time we're getting criticism of Brandin Podziemski, it goes back to, hey, well, you said that you were going to be, coming into the league before you'd even play a game, you said you're going to be a triple-double guy. During the offseason, you said you want to be in the most improved player conversation. You said you want to be known and seen as one of the brightest young stars in the league. So people will always go back to that. The issue for me, and this really comes down to legit a philosophical debate, an argument, more so than it does an actual basketball one. I'm never going to tear someone down for having ambition. Like, I'm just not. That's just not me. That's just like a really negative view of life and of people. I generally try and live my life glass half full, optimistic, not just in what I do, but in what other people do. Okay? And so if you just take away the basketball element, if you guys watching this, you guys work a job, you guys have interests, whatever else, if you came to me and said, you know what, next financial year, I want to make $200,000 next financial year, even though I'm only making $70,000 right now, I'd be like, okay, cool, that's going to be tough, but go for it. If that's your ambition, that's what you want to do, that's the challenge you want to set for yourself, absolutely go for it. Okay? If you come back to me at the end of next financial year and say, you know what, I still only made $70,000 again, I got nowhere near the $200,000, I'm not going to tear you down for it. I'm not going to rip into you and just absolutely criticize you and get on your case for not being able to reach that goal. I'm just not. Like, what is the point? What benefit does it do for me to tear you down like that? It just doesn't. I'm not going to live my life criticizing other people for the ambitions that they set themselves. Because a lot of the time, like, people set themselves overly ambitious goals that they're not necessarily going to reach. So when Brandin Podziemski says in the offseason that I want to be in the most improved player conversation, I want to get up 8 to 10 threes a game, I'm looking at that thinking, I'm like, that's pretty ambitious. And I'm not going to set my expectations on you based off that. I'm just not, because that is like that's you going out on a limb, and you can set those goals and ambitions. That's fine. I'm never going to tell someone they can't do something, but I can also look at it and say that's going to be difficult to do. That's a challenge. That's going to be hard to meet. And so again, I'm not setting my expectations on that. I have no issue, no worries with NBA players, athletes, anyone in life going out and setting themselves whatever goal or ambition they want to do. That's like, you do you. You do what you believe you can do. Okay, I'm not going to set a bar on what you can do. Okay, it's just not me. I have more of an issue with what the franchise did. The franchise has made 2 big mistakes with Brandin Podziemski. Okay, first of all, we can look at whether they should have traded him or not. And you know what? They probably should have. They probably should have traded him. But you do not have to go out and make, like, if you're Joe Lacob, you're at Summer League, you do not have to go out and make this public statement to the world that we think we've got a future all-star on our hands. You just don't need to do that. Like, that is setting him up for failure, in my opinion, when you're the franchise putting expectations on a young player like that. That's a big mistake to me. Even if you think that privately, okay, and you're saying that maybe to Danny Ainge and the Utah Jazz in trade discussions for Lauri Markkanen. You just don't have to blatantly come out and say it on live TV. I just think that's a huge mistake that the Warriors just shouldn't have, they shouldn't have done that. Joe Lacob shouldn't have done that. I know he's very high on young players and the Warrior young players, as you should be. You always want to, again, be a glass half full, optimistic outlook on the Warrior young players. And I have no issue with that. But saying you have a future all-star in your hands, that's taking it too far. You can have glowing praise and optimistic outlooks on your young players without going that far and saying, putting a definitive goal on this that, hey, this is a future all-star right here. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake is after they chose not to trade him, is that they set him a responsibility in a role that was totally unfair. Totally unfair based on his skill set and based on his experience. His full rookie year, he played with Steph Curry and Chris Paul, two of the greatest point guards in the history of the game, probably the two best point guards in the last 15, 20 years of basketball, this century. Okay? At no stage did Steve Kerr ask Brandin Podziemski in a meaningful NBA game, right, that Brandin Podziemski needs to go out there and be the primary point guard in a Warrior unit, right? At no point did he really do that, okay? And yet we get to the offseason and the Warriors all of a sudden decide that, hey, okay, we've let Chris Paul walk. No, we're not going to bring in another veteran point guard because we think this guy can just handle the ball handling and playmaking duties when Steph Curry, again, the greatest point guard arguably in the history of the game, when he's off the floor, this young kid, this 21-year-old in his second season who's never fully been a point guard, you go back to his college days, he averaged 3.7 assists. This is not a point guard in college that was averaging 6-7 assists a game. Okay, his first year in the league, he's a combo guard. He's a two guard who can do some ball handling, playmaking duties additionally to playing off the ball, right? That's just not fair. It wasn't fair for them to expect that this guy was going to come out and all of a sudden just be so capable of running an NBA offense when he's just never done that before in his career. Okay, we've never seen it. He's 21 years old. You're on a team that's trying, if you're a rebuilding team and you want to try that kind of thing, go for it. Go for it. If you're not in the interest of winning games, absolutely go for it. We saw the Spurs last season starting Jeremy Sohan at point guard. Everyone could see pretty quickly that it wasn't working, but it doesn't matter. You're not actually trying to win games. Okay? But if you are a playoff contending team, you've got Steph and Curry, it's just not fair on Brandin Podziemski to say, yeah, you're going to be just handling all the non-Steph minutes. We want you to create offense for us. It's just a responsibility and a role that they gave him that is just totally out of whack with his skill set at this current point and his experience. So that's just two big mistakes. Labeling him as a future all-star and then the roster, and Steve has come out and said that. He said that yesterday in his press conference. This was the quote in regard to, obviously, the Warriors now bringing in Dennis Schroeder. He said about Podz, he said, he's really ideally suited as a secondary playmaker, not the primary shot creator. I think we've put him in a tough spot this year based on our roster and based on our combinations. Okay, cool. Why did it take you 25 games to realize this? How many times in the offseason did I say, either on this podcast or in my writing on bluemanhoop.com, how many times did I say this is a huge risk? This is a massive risk the Warriors are taking by just giving Brandin Podziemski this role without having any kind of backup, without having another veteran option out there to say, hey, if things go awry and things don't pan out, we have a different option here. And the Warriors, you know what? They are incredibly fortunate that Dennis Schroeder was just on the trade market available at a pretty cheap price at the exact perfect time, at the exact first point where they could go out and use DeAnthony Melton's salary in a trade. Really fortunate that this guy it just all lined up perfectly. And now they've got the guy who can be the veteran option to not only play next to Steph, but obviously handle all the non-Steph minutes. And now Podz, hopefully, it can actually help him Like everyone's saying on social media, oh, Podz minutes, they're just gone. He just won't play much anymore. No, he'll still play because I think that he will be able to actually have some kind of impact more in the role that he was in last season where he's playing off Steph or Chris Paul and he's able to do a little bit of everything rather than being solely asked to create offense. I don't know. We'll wait and see. The last thing I wanted to get into here, just back onto the trade stuff for a second. Jimmy Butler. So a lot of people, he obviously went for a huge game on what was it, Monday night, 35, 19, 10 assists in an overtime loss to the Detroit Pistons. And everyone's seeing that game thinking, okay, Warriors, just trade for this guy, just trade for this guy. I think we've still got to understand and appreciate how difficult trading for Jimmy Butler would be. Like just in a purely trade sense. Like trying to execute a deal with the Heat where it actually works financially and where both sides are actually happy with the deal. It's super difficult to the point where I just struggle to see it happening. He makes $48.8 million this season. That means you are sending out at least 4 players. Like at least 4. Because really you could get Wiggins, Schroeder, and like GP2, I think. But again, you don't have the money left over to sign a couple of guys. So it has to be a 4th. And in any deal, Kuminga is going to go out because you are not paying Butler and Kuminga as free agents in the offseason. You're just not doing that. So if you're trading for Butler, it's a realization, it's an understanding that, okay, we're not paying Kuminga, therefore he's probably going to be part of the trade, right? So it's just really, really difficult to execute a deal when you've got 3 or 4 players going out, when you are dealing with a team in Miami who are over the apron and therefore can only take back 100% of salary. They can't take, like I was looking at a trade where it was like Wiggins, GP2, Schroeder, Kuminga, and it was like Butler, Kevin Love, and Alec Burks coming back. It was a 7-player trade. Okay, and it actually worked for the Warriors because they brought back like 1.2 million less, and therefore they could go out and sign a guy, and that would be, the 4 for 4 going out, 4 coming in. But then it didn't work for the Heat because they're taking like 1.2 million more, and under normal, previous scenarios where you can take back 120%, that would be fine. You can't do that as an over the apron team. They can only take back 100%. Basically has to get a third team involved. When you get a third team involved, there's more players involved. Like, how many times do we see a 3-team, like 7 to 10 player trade? And I mean 7 to 10 players who are legit all like rotation guys. Like, you're trading Wiggins, Kuminga, that's 2 starters for you right now. You're trading GP2 and Schroeder's a starter too, so you're trading 3 starters. GP2's still a rotation guy, although I'm not necessarily sure he should be. Like, Butler, Burks, Kevin Love, like, it's just so difficult. It's so difficult. And this is why I think Mike Dunleavy Jr. in the front office, they have to decide, okay, when it comes down to it, is there actually, like, we can say that, okay, come February 6th in the final 24 hours before the deadline, Miami might really soften their stance and say, yeah, like, we're just happy to get rid of Jimmy and it doesn't really matter what the assets are. I don't think that's going to happen. But even if it does, what's the actual landscape of the trade? Like, what does it actually look like where it's legal? Like, that's the first thing you've got to get off the ground here, is like, how can you actually make a legal trade? And again, have the money left over to sign guys as free agents when you have to fill out the remainder of the roster. It's so difficult. So I think it's really easy for fans to, clamor for the franchise to make a big move and trade for Jimmy Butler. But again, the way the NBA is now with the tax aprons and stuff like that, it's just, I think it's important to appreciate and understand that it's just really, really difficult. And if anything, if I was going to criticize the franchise, it's the fact that they weren't able to do the marketing deal. Because with marketing, you had a guy who you could classify as that star player who was making $17 million. And therefore, like, that was actually like really easy because of the salary he was on. Now, if you want to trade for marketing, he's over on 40 and you got the same issues again. And so that's probably where I criticize the franchise. Is like, he was the guy you had to go after, not just because of what he was going to be from an on-court fit standpoint, but because of the money he was making and the fact that, like, you could have done that pretty easily and then obviously extended him in the offseason. So I don't know. It's super interesting. I'm not saying a Butler trade is completely off the canvas and not possible, but it is super difficult to the point of, me as a fan, I think maybe we should lower our expectations here. And even as Mike Dunleavy, you should probably look at this and say, are we really, when it comes down to it, are we really going to be able to get a deal done? And if we can't, then what's stopping us from going and making like this Vucevic trade now, this trade for like a $15 to $20 million guy? I know the guys on the Hoop Collective the other day, they were talking about like the deals that we might see before the deadline, and they were saying the same thing, where it's like, you're probably going to see these guys making $15 to $20 million. They may get moved, but trading any player making 30 plus and particularly 40 plus $million, it's just so difficult that we're probably not going to see it. So again, I don't know. We'll wait and see, but I'm not expecting the franchise to necessarily go out and trade for Jimmy Butler or LeBron, because it's just, one, you need to make a deal legally possible before you even get into the crux of, are both teams going to be happy with the assets that are going in and out here and the picks that would be involved, which I haven't even spoken about that. So it's just, yeah, it's difficult. Last thing, so the Warriors play the Grizzlies tomorrow. Super fascinated, super looking forward to seeing Dennis Schroeder in his debut. Sounds like, so I'm assuming the starting lineup will be Steph, Schroeder, Wiggins, Kuminga, Loon, and Draymond will still come off the bench. If they just change the Draymond Kuminga thing again, and Draymond starting, Kuminga's off the bench, I'll be disappointed. I know a lot of people will be like, yep, that's the right decision. I just would be disappointed because it's just changing things up after not enough time of evaluating, I think, whether or not it works. So we'll wait and see. But that would lead, so to me, so Steph, Schroeder, Wiggins, Kuminga, Loon, and then off the bench, Schroeder's obviously going to run the second unit. I think Podz will play. Hield will have to play because of his shooting. Draymond, clearly, obviously, will play a lot. And then I think TJD should get run based on the fact that Schroeder's there and you're going to be running a lot of pick and roll. So that is, what are we at? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players. 9 players. So that basically still leaves over Moody. I'm just got him out of the equation at the moment because he's got that knee issue. But it basically leaves slow-mo GP2 Lindy Waters. Now, I could say that, like, you should just not play any of those guys. I'd actually, like, I don't know. I'm looking at this very simplistically. I'm sorry. Who's the best player out of those three? Who is the best player? To me, it's Kyle Anderson. And so I just want the best player. When you're asking who should be playing out of those guys, just play the best player. Find a way, find rotations and combinations where the best player of that trio is out there. Because it doesn't make any sense to me, like watching the game the other day against the Mavericks, where GP2 is playing 12 minutes, Lindy Waters is playing a heap, and he actually played well, to be fair. He made 4 or 7 on his threes. But Kyle Anderson being a DNP, particularly when you've had so many defensive issues and the Mavericks put up 143 and were torching you, what was stopping Steve from like putting slow-mo out there for 5 minutes and actually putting him on Luka and saying, because like putting GP2 on Luka, it's like putting a snail at my foot. Like he can just, like me going out there and putting a snail at my foot is essentially what putting GP2 on Luka is, because he can just see over him. Like he can shoot over him. He can pass over him. It's really not that much of a deterrent. And so what was stopping Steve from putting slow-mo on Luka for 5 minutes? I don't know. So I just think he should be playing. Because if he's not playing, then you got to trade him. He's got to be part of one of these deals. And I said, I put him in the GP2 Anderson to Chicago for Vucevic trade. And I could see that, because if he's not playing, then he's $8.8 million and you got to utilize that some way or another, either on the floor or via a trade. So I would play him. GP2, you're shooting 13.8% from 3. I said on the live stream, get him out of the rotation. Get him out of the rotation. Like, that's what you got to do. I think he's a safety valve, a break glass in case of emergency. If Ja Morant gets off the leash, but you've got Wiggins, and now you've got Schroeder. And so to me, Schroeder should be just impacting GP2's minutes more than anyone else because he provides some of that defensive intensity and defensive ability while also being a million times better offensive player, obviously. And then Lindy Waters, I think Waters will play for what it's worth. I think Waters will play, but that means so he would be the 10th or 11th. If him and Anderson play, then you're going 11 deep, assuming Moody's out, right? Which I think is fine. Like if you're going 11 deep, I'd actually prefer probably to go 10 deep and just have Waters out of the rotation as well. I just don't know how as much as I want Anderson to play, I don't think Steve will necessarily do it too much when you've also got Kuminga, Draymond, Looney, and TJD in there. I don't know, but I think a lot of Warrior fans would say we'd rather err on size than err on being super small and going with 3-4 guard lineups. Like I'm pretty sure Warrior fans would prefer for Steve to go big and even sacrifice a little bit of shooting because, we've seen way too many Warrior lineups that are just super small and just therefore have defensive issues. And then if you're throwing GP2 out there, there's still like shooting issues because he's just not a threat from three. Podz, not really a threat from three. So, I don't know. We'll wait and see, but I think that's the kind of rotation I would like to see where it's those five starting and then Podz, Hield, Anderson, Draymond, TJD coming off the bench. That's the 10. GP2, bad luck. Sorry, you're just not shooting the ball well enough. Waters played well the other day. I don't see him part of a playoff rotation. And so if I don't see you part of a playoff rotation, then I don't think there's a point necessarily going to an 11-man rotation in the regular season just to fit this guy in. So anyway, looking forward to the game though. Dennis Schroeder's debut. It's going to be a hard one. Grizzlies playing pretty well at the moment. So the Warriors will probably enter underdogs, you'd imagine, and they certainly need to turn things around given their 2-8 record over the previous 10 games. But we'll wait and see how much of an impact Dennis can make. I'll finish it up there. Thank you very much to those of you if you've got to this point over 40 minutes into the episode. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252, that's POK252 on X/Twitter. You can follow us Golden State with Mates on TikTok and Instagram as well. I'll be back for a post-game live after the game against the Grizzlies tomorrow. Let's hope for a Warrior win.